President Yoon Suk-yeol recently convened his first export strategy meeting and highlighted the importance of boosting sales of defense equipment. So is the defense industry the next growth engine? What are Korea's prospects of becoming the world's fourth largest weapons exporter? And aside from its defense deals, what is the latest regarding Korea's participation in Saudi Arabia's NEOM project? Welcome to Issues and Insiders. Today we address Korea's efforts to diversify its export products and their destinations amid the current dismal economic prospects worldwide, of course. From Moa, I have Kwon Soa here in the studio. Soa, it's good to have you here.
Good afternoon.
I also have Professor Moamen Gouda from Hankuk University of Foreign Studies. Professor, again, it's a pleasure to have you here.
It's my pleasure, Ree. Thank you so much.
Right, so let's begin then, with a few words regarding last week's meeting presided over by President Yoon Suk-yeol on efforts to diversify exports here in the country.
Sure. So President Yoon hosted a defense export strategy meeting at the Korea Aerospace Industries in Sacheon, Gyeongsang-namdo Province last Thursday with over 60 defense company CEOs and the Joint Chiefs of Staff in attendance. So the gist of the meeting was promoting weapons exports, with President Yoon for the first time publicly speaking about his ambitions to make South Korea the fourth largest arms exporter in the world. He referred to the defense industry as a new future growth engine and the pivot or backbone of high-tech industries. Now, while praising what South Korea has achieved so far, highlighting the country has now grown into a defense powerhouse that builds some of the world's best next-generation Aegis destroyers and develops state-of-the-art fighter jets, President Yoon noted the intensifying competition for technological supremacy, stressing that South Korea needs to secure competitiveness and develop game-changing weapon systems for future wars. So to achieve that, the president vowed for active government support by expanding cooperation between the defense industry and other related industries, including nuclear power plants and construction sectors as well. And for that, it will also need a pan-governmental system, which the president promised as well. Meanwhile, President Yoon brushed off concerns from some political parties that fear a vacuum in the nation's military force if more focus is put on outbound shipments of these arsenals. President Yoon said the government will maintain a thorough military readiness posture and also highlighted that actually defense product exports will also contribute to South Korea's security and peace and stability in the international community.
Right. And Professor Gouda, as Soa mentioned, President Yoon Suk-yeol believes that the defense industry is the future growth engine for South Korea. What are your thoughts regarding this particular belief?
Okay, I have to start by saying that the typical answer for an economist, this depends, definitely. So on the one hand, this is a very good policy. This is a very good strategy. This has been followed before in, for instance, if we can mention USA with DARPA, Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency. It was established in 1958 with the threat of Soviet Union. And here in Korea, you have this sort of threat also with North Korea, which we will come and talk about it again. But DARPA, for instance, in the US created many things that we use on daily basis. We have the internet, we have the weapons, we have the stealth weapons, we have the voice recognition tools and all that. So it was a great engine for growth all over the modern economy, actually. On the other hand, however, this is always a high-risk, high-reward policy. So actually, majority of DARPA projects were failures. So would South Korea be able to follow this kind of strategy where you have to have lots of failures until you have something that clicks with the technology and all that? And also with Korean culture, we might have some issues of hierarchical structure of the culture and all that. So with DARPA, it was very easy, very flexible. So I have some fears with regards to this kind of flexibility in the Korean case. However, I think this is a great, overall, this is a great policy, but you have to be very careful of what you're aiming for.
Right, I suppose, time will tell then. In the meantime then, Soa, as you mentioned, the ultimate goal is to make Korea the world's fourth largest exporter of arms. How feasible is this particular goal?
Sunny, if you look at the most recent growth, it's quite pretty feasible goal. The country's annual defense exports stood at an average of $3 billion for many years until year 2020. But last year, the country recorded over $7 billion worth of arms exports. And this year, already $17 billion have been reached. And by the end of this year, we're also expecting the figure to likely top $20 billion. Now, from year 2017 to 2021, South Korea's global market share was 2.8%, ranking 8th among defense exporters. The Yoon administration's goal is to gain a market share of at least 5% by 2027 to get into the top 4. With the tens of billions of won in spending in R&D and more than 1 trillion won in technical cooperation between the private and public sectors by 2027, there are bright prospects, but of course, it's the demand that counts as well, of which this year South Korea had an unprecedented amount, largely attributed to its biggest ever export contract with Poland, which includes K2 tanks, K9 self-propelled howitzers, FA-50 light combat fighter jets, and Chunmoo multiple rocket launchers. And those deals worth over $14.7 billion. And this is, of course, on the back of the Ukraine war that Poland needs this support. Now, efforts are also being made to customize arsenals for overseas buyers, and this is also expected to help Korea, get up the ladder as a defense export superpower. So these weapons are tailored to security challenges and also climate. So, for instance, K9s that are shipped to northern climate countries like Norway, for instance, have extra heating systems, and then if they sent them to hot countries, they have more air conditioning, for instance. So that's also another strategy.
Right, I see. And Professor Gouda, before we move forward, Soa mentioned the war in Ukraine. And that being said now, I understand Korean defense equipment are indirectly supporting Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russia's invasion. Can you explain this reality for us and perhaps also touch upon its broader implications?
Sure. So actually, Korea was committed, or I think, committed to sending non-lethal weapons to Ukraine so far. However, we now know that there is an ongoing deal between U.S. and Korea to send more of a lethal weapons, but through U.S. to Ukraine, which is, of course, we're talking about around 100,000 artillery ammunitions, which will support the Ukraine counteroffensive for the several weeks to come. However, we have some issues with this kind of policy with regard to the Russian reflection on this policy. So President Putin have recently talked directly about South Korea and said if South Korea is supplying Ukraine with this, it might be like if Moscow is supplying North Korea with weapons. So I think this is, of course, I would say this is like a red flag. He's trying to send a red flag for Korean government and all that. However, what I also want to emphasize here is that the threat of North Korea and this kind of threat can be a great engine for the idea of President Yoon regarding defense strategy. Because we have seen this, and I have been listening to Soa, and she said that President Yoon is saying this is the new engine of growth for Korean economy and all that. However, this is not new. We have this even from the 15th and 16th century in Europe. This idea of competition, this idea of war and military and all that, it supplied lots of incentives and lots of resources to have war efforts and all that. So this can be a great engine for Korea in the upcoming few years, hopefully.
Right, and talking about Korea, Soa, following its defense deal with Saudi Arabia earlier this year, Korea is now also poised to partake in Saudi Arabia's NEOM project. Could you first tell us a bit about the project and perhaps about Korea's role in that particular initiative?
Sure. The $500 billion NEOM project is in the spotlight here in Korea, and even more since Saudi Arabia's Crown Prince visited Seoul earlier this month. NEOM City is being constructed in Tabuk province in northwestern Saudi Arabia and is to cover an area of 26,500 square kilometers. The city is part of the country's 2030 vision to go green, diversify its economy and be less dependent on its oil, which is the country's main source of wealth. Now, the NEOM project is behind the original schedule, but for South Korea, there's plenty of room for businesses until its completion. Some 2 weeks ago, during Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's visit to Seoul, South Korean companies signed 26 MOUs worth tens of trillions of won with the Saudi government. They're not all legally binding, but they are to be involving the establishment of the city's rail network and hydrogen train development, as well as a petrochemical project. Now, those that I just named are involving Hyundai Rodem and S-Oil as well. And just recently, also, internet portal giant Naver expressed wishes to participate in the project with its up-to-date digital twin technology that could be featured in the smart city.
Right, I see. And staying with the NEOM initiative, Professor Gouda, how feasible is this ambitious project, and what has been the regional response to it?
Okay, so actually, the feasibility, in my point of view, I think this is I would say, the pinnacle of what MBS or Mohammed bin Salman's strategy for Saudi Arabia in the next few years. Please remember that so far we've been talking about NEOM from an economic perspective, right? About the projects and all that. However, one thing that's usually missed in the media, even Western media, talking about a new governance system in NEOM. So NEOM will not be ruled with the same rules as the rest of Saudi Arabia. This is something that we should consider, because if it's ruled with like the rest of Saudi Arabia, I think it will be very hard for foreigners to go there and live there with the kind of laws that we know of regarding gender and all that, which is being reformed now, but still there are ways to go. So it will have a new governance structure. I think this also will be a peace city. This is 40 kilometers from Israel, and this is very near also to Jordan, Palestine, and Egypt, and all that. So I think this will be a city that's meant to be the city of the future of the Middle East. So I think it will be tremendously. I mean, if it happens, it will be great. If it will be done, yes, it will be done. It will be finished. If people will go and live there, we still have wait and see until we see the laws and regulations that will be implemented in this kind of city.
Right, I see. So again, there are many questions there, but very few answers at this particular point then. So last week, also here on the local front, President Yoon Suk-yeol played host to his Kenyan counterpart, William Ruto. And of course, President Ruto highlighted Korea's remarkable economic advancements from a war-torn country. Now, that being said, could you tell us a bit more about Korea's broader business ventures with Africa?
Right. On the occasion of the meeting between Presidents Yoon and Ruto, the two countries promised to expand economic exchanges in various areas like energy, defense, and transport. And following that one-on-one, in a broader plan, President Yoon expressed South Korea's intent to push for free trade agreements with African nations and become a true partner of Africa and its future growth. And what's interesting is that not a single FTA has been yet signed between South Korea and an African country, while there lies enough potential in the resource-rich continent. And currently, Africa only accounts for 1.3% of South Korea's trade. So, as part of the country's aim to diversify its trade partners, the government and more Korean companies are looking into advancing into the African continent.
Right, that is good to know. And in the meantime, then, Professor Gouda, what can you tell us about efforts that Korea can make to further perhaps expand its business ventures with the Middle East?
Sure. So actually, one thing that I was following lately is the Invest Korea website, which is, I think, fabulous website, and I'm saying this because I've been working I work in investment policies for many years. However, one thing that can be done, it can perhaps be translated to Arabic, because still this is a huge issue for many Arab governments to be able to comprehend all what's happening in this website. This is one thing. This is a minor thing. However, the major thing is that Korea is trying to have this kind of strategic cooperation with Middle East. And I think Korea have this kind of winning card, because you have political and economic stability plus technological innovation. So it's stable, whatever the government is being held with whatever party, but it's technological innovation that matters as well. One last thing I would like to say is that Korea also have a great competitive advantage, is that you have the economic deals with no political strings attached. like what other Western countries are doing. You always have this kind of cards and policies to be implemented, but you don't have that with Korea. So I think this is why Middle East is so interested in joining Korea in strategic cooperations and economic deals.
Right, I see a valid point right there. All right, Professor Gouda, as always, thank you very much for your insights. And Soa, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Right, well, that is all the time we have for this edition. Do join us again same time tomorrow. Thank you for now.